NCERT Important Lines series, we will be covering biodiversity and conservation. So, let's start. Which has highest biodiversity? That is South America. Taxon facing a very high risk in extinction in the wild is in the future immediate. इनको हम बोलते हैं endangered and critically. And near future is also known as endangered. So let's start. The common man would find it hard to believe that there are more than 20,000 species of ants, 3 lakh species of beetles, 28,000 species of fishes, and nearly 20,000 species of orchids. So then we will read this. 20,000 species of ants, 3 lakh species of beetles, 28,000 species of fishes, and 20,000 species of orchids. In our biosphere, immense diversity or heterogeneity exists not only at the species level but at all the levels of the biological organizations, ranging from macromolecules within cells to biomes. Biodiversity is a term popularized by the sociobiologist Edward Wilson to describe the combined diversity at all the levels of the biological organizations. The most important of them are genetic diversity. A single species might show high diversity at the genetic level over its distributional range. Genetic variation shown by the medicinal plant Rauwolfia vomitaria growing in the different Himalayan ranges might be in terms of potency and concentration of the active chemical reserpine that the plant produces. India has more than 50,000 genetically different strains of rice, 1,000 varieties of mango. Species diversity. The diversity at the species level, for example, the Western Ghats have a great amphibian species diversity than the Eastern Ghats. Ecological diversity. At the ecosystem level, for instance, wetsit deserts, rainforests, mangroves, coral reefs, wetlands, estuaries, alpine meadows has a great ecosystem diversity than a Scandinavian country like the Norway. It has taken millions of years of evolution to accumulate this rich diversity in nature, but we could lose all the wealth in less than 2 centuries if the present rates of species losses continues. Biodiversity and its conservation are now vital or environmental issues of international concern. As more and more people around the world begin to realize the critical importance of biodiversity for our survival and well-being on this planet. How many species are there on Earth and how many in India? Since there are published records of all the species discovered and named, we know that many species in all have recorded so far, but it is not easy to answer. The question of how many species there are on Earth, according to International Union of Conservation of Nature and Natural Resources (IUCN) 2004, the total number of plants and animal species described so far is slightly more than 1.5 million, but we have no clear idea of how many species are yet to be discovered and described. Estimates may vary and many of them are not only educated guesses. For many taxonomic groups, species inventories are more complete in the temperate than in the tropical countries, considering that an overwhelming large proportion of the species waiting to be discovered in the tropics. Sociologists makes a statistical comparisons in the temperate tropical species richness of an exhaustively studied group of insects and extrapolate this ratio to other groups of animals and plants to come up with a gross estimate of the total number of species on Earth. Some extreme estimates range from 20 to 50 million, but a more conservative and scientifically round estimate made by Robert May places the global species diversity at about 7 million. Let us look at some interesting aspects about the Earth's biodiversity based on the currently available species inventories. More than 70% of all the species recorded are animals, while plants including algae, fungi, bryophytes, gymnosperms, and angiosperms comprise no more than 22% of the total. Among animals, insects are the most species-rich taxonomic group, making up more than 70% of the total. This means out of 10 animals on this planet, 7 are insects. Again, how do we explain the enormous diversification of insects? The number of fungi species in the world is more than the combined species of fishes, amphibians, reptiles, and mammals. So here it is other animals groups: crustaceans, mollusks, insects. So to remember this, we use a IOMC. First is insects, then other animal groups, mollusks, then crustaceans. IOMC. Vertebrates. So fishes, birds, reptiles, amphibians, and mammals. For this we use FABRAM. FABRAM. Fishes, birds, reptiles, amphibians, then mammals. Alright. In plants, maximum number of species among the global biodiversity is fungi, and right side is angiosperm, algae, lichens, mosses, ferns, and lice. To remember this, we use Arun is a fun guy. Arun is a fun guy. Angiosperm. See, maximum number of species among global biodiversity is fungi, but if we look this structure carefully, angiosperms is more than fungi in these structures. To remember this, you should remember this, but in text it is written that fungi has the maximum number of species. Alright, here it comes algae, then it comes here mosses, ferns, and lice, and lichens. AL, FM, FMAL, okay, FMLAL, FMAL. Remember this. Let us look. Ferns and lice, mosses, algae, and lichens. Ferns and lice, mosses, algae, and lichens. Okay. It should be noted that these estimates do not give any figure for the prokaryotes. Biologists are not sure about how many prokaryotic species there might be. The problem is that conventional taxonomic methods are not suitable for identify microbial species, and many species are simply not culturable under laboratory conditions. If we accept biochemical or molecular criteria for delineating species for this group, then the diversity alone might run into millions. Although India has only 2.4% of the world's land area, its shares of the global species diversity is an impressive 8.1%. That is what makes our country one of the 12 mega diversity countries of the world. Nearly 45,000 species of plants, twice as many of animals, have been recorded from India. How many living species are actually there waiting to be discovered and named? If we accept May Global's estimates, only 22% of the total species have been recorded so far. Applying this proportion in India's diversity figures, we estimate that there are probably more than 1 lakh plant species and more than 3 lakh animal species yet to be discovered and described. Would we ever be able to complete the inventory of the biological wealth of our country? Consider the immense trained manpower, taxonomists, and the time required to complete the job. The situation appears more hopeless when we realize that a large function of this species face the threat of becoming extinct even before we discover them. Nature's biological library is burning even before we catalog the titles of all the books stocked there. Latitudinal gradients. The diversity of plants and animals is not uniform throughout the world but shows a rather uneven distribution. For many groups of animals or plants, there are interesting patterns in the diversity. The most well known being the latitudinal gradient in the diversity. In general, species diversity decreases as we move away from the equator towards the poles, with very few exceptions. Tropics, latitudinal range of 23.5 degree north to 23.5 degrees south, have more species than the temperate or the polar areas. Colombia, located near the equator, has nearly 1400 species of birds, while New York at 41 degree north has 105 species. So Colombia has 1,400 species of birds. New York, situated 41 degrees Celsius north, has 105 species. Greenland at 71 degree north has only 56 species. India, which with much of its land area in the tropical latitudes has more than 1200 species of birds. A forest in a tropical region like Ecuador has up to 10 times as many species of vascular plants as a forest of equal area in tropical region like Midwest of the USA. The largely tropical Amazonian rainforest in the South America has the greatest biodiversity on the earth. It is home to more than 40,000 species of plants, 3,000 species of fishes, 1,300 of birds, 427 of mammals, 427 of amphibians, 378 of reptiles, and of more than 1,25,000 of invertebrates. 40,000 plants, 3,000 species, 1,300 of birds, 427 mammals, 427 amphibians, 378 reptiles, and more than 1,25,000 invertebrates. Scientists estimate that in this rainforest there might be at least 2 million insect species waiting to be discovered and named. What is so special about tropics that might account for the greater biological diversity? Ecologists and evolutionary biologists have proposed various hypotheses. Some important ones are a speciation is generally a function of time, unlike temperate regions subjected to frequent glaciations of in the past. Tropical latitudes have remained relatively undisturbed for millions of years and thus had a long evolutionary time for the species diversification. Tropical environments, unlike temperate ones, are less seasonal, relatively more constant and predictable. Such constant environment promote niche specialization and led to a greater species diversity, and there is more solar energy available in the tropics, which contributes to a higher productivity. This in turn might contribute indirectly to a greater diversity. Species area relationships. During his pioneering and extensive explorations in the wilderness of South American jungles, the great German naturalist and the geographer Alexander von Humboldt observed that within a region of species richness increased with increasing explored area, but up to a limit. Great German naturalist and geographer Alexander von Humboldt. In fact, the relation between species reaches an area for a wide variety of taxa, angiosperm plants, birds, bats, freshwater fishes turns out to be a rectangular hyperbola. On logarithmic scale, the relationship is a straight line described by the equation log s is equals to log c plus z log a. S is the species richness, a is the area, z is a slope of line, regression coefficient, c is the y-intercept. Ecologists have discovered that the value of z lies in the range of 0.1 to 0.2 regardless of the taxonomic group or the region where it is the plants in the Britain, birds in the California, or mollusks in the New York State. The slopes of the regression line are amazingly similar, but if you analyze the species area relationships among very large areas like entire continents, you will find that the slope of the line to be much steeper. Z values in the range of 0.6 to 0.1. 0.6 to 1.2. For example, for frugivorous, fruit-eating birds and mammals in the tropical forests of different countries, the slope is found to be 1.15. The importance of species diversity to the ecosystem. Does the number of the species in a community really matter to the functioning of an ecosystem? This is a question for which ecologists have not been able to give a definitive answer. For many decades, ecologists believe that the communities with more species generally tend to be more stable than those with the less species. What exactly is the stability for a biological community? A stable community should not show too much variation in productivity from year to year. It must be either resistant or resilient to occasional disturbances, natural or man-made, and it must also be resistant to invasions by alien species. We don't know how these attributes are linked to species richness in a community, but David Tillman's long-term ecosystem experiments using outdoor plots provide some tentative answers. Tillman found that plots with more species showed less year-to-year variation in total biomass. He also showed that in his experiments, increased biodiversity contributes to higher productivity. Although we may not understand completely how species richness contributes to the well-being of an ecosystem, we know enough to realize that rich biodiversity is not only essential for ecosystem health, but imperative for the very survival of the human race on this planet. At a time when we are losing species at an alarming pace, one might ask, does it really matter to us if a few species become extinct? Would Western Ghats ecosystem be less functional if one of its tree frog species is lost forever? However, how is our quality of life affected if instead of 20,000 where we have only 50,000 species of ants on earth? How there are no direct answer to such naive questions, but we can develop a proper perspective through an analogy, the rivet popper hypothesis used by Stanford ecologist Paul Ehrlich. In an urban ecosystem, all parts are joined together using thousands of rivets, which is a species. In every passenger traveling in it starts popping a rivet to take home, causing a species to become extinct. It may not affect flight safety, proper functioning of the ecosystem initially, but as more and more rivets are removed, the plane becomes dangerously weak over a period of time. Furthermore, which rivet is removed may also be critical. Loss of rivets on the wings, key species that drive major ecosystem functions, is obviously a more serious threat to our flight safety than loss of a few rivets on the seats of windows inside a plane. Loss of biodiversity. While it is doubtful if any new species are being added through speciation into the Earth's treasury of species, there is no doubt about the continuing losses. The biological wealth of our country has been declining rapidly, and accusing finger is clearly pointing into human activities. The colonization of the tropical Pacific islands by humans is said to have led to extinction of more than 2,000 species of native birds. The IUCN Red List 2004 documents the extinction of the 784 species, including 338 vertebrates, 359 invertebrates, and 87 plants, and in the last 500 years. So 784 species, 338 vertebrates, 359 invertebrates, and 87 plants. Some examples of the recent extinctions include dodo, Mauritius, quagga Africa, thylacine Australia, Steller sea cow Russia, and 3 subspecies, Bali, Java, and Caspian of the tiger. The last 20 years alone have witnessed the disappearance of the 27 species. Careful analysis of records shows that the extinctions across taxa are not random. Some groups like amphibians appears to be more vulnerable to extinctions, adding to the grim scenario of the extinctions in the fact that more than 15,500 species worldwide are facing the threat of extinction. Presently, 12% of all the birds, 23% of the mammals, 32% of the amphibians, and 31% of the gymnosperms present in the world face the threat of extinction. From a study of the history of the life on the earth through fossil records, we learn that the large-scale loss of species, like the one we are currently witnessing, have also happened earlier, even before the human appears on the scene. During the long period, more than 3 billion years since the origin and the diversification of life on Earth, there were 5 episodes of mass extinctions of species. How is the 6th extinction presently in progress different from the previous episodes? The difference is in the rates of the current species. Extinction rates are estimated to be 100 to 1,000 times faster than in the pre-human times. And our activities are responsible for the faster rates. Ecologists warn that if the present trend continues, nearly half of the species on Earth might be wiped out within the next 100 years. In general, loss of biodiversity in a region may lead to decline in plant production, lowered resistance to environmental perturbations such as drought, with increased variability in certain ecosystem processes such as plant productivity, water use, and pest and disease uses. Causes of biodiversity uses. The accelerated rates of the species extinctions that the whole world is facing now are largely due to the human activities. There are 4 major causes. The Abel quadrant is the subject used to describe them. Habitat loss and fragmentation. This is the most important cause driving animals and plants to extinction. The most dramatic examples of habitat loss comes from the tropical rainforest. Once rainforests now cover no more than the 6%. They are being destroyed fast. By the time you finish reading this chapter, 1,000 more hectares of the rainforest would have been lost. The Amazon rainforest, it is so huge that it is called the lungs of the planet, harboring probably millions of species, is being cut and cleared for cultivating soybeans or for conservation of grasslands for raising beef cattle. Besides total loss, the degradation of many habitats by pollution also threatens the survival of many species. When the large habitats are broken up into small fragments due to the various small human activities, mammals and birds requiring large territories and certain and certain animals will with migratory habits are badly affected, leading to population declines. Overexploitation. Humans have always depended on nature for food and shelter, but when need turns into greed, it leads to overexploitation of natural resources. Many species extinctions in the last 500 years, Taylor sea cows, passenger pigeon, were due to overexploitations by humans. Presently, many species, marine fishes populations around the world are over-harvested, endangering the continued existence of some commercially important species. Alien invasions, species invasions. When the alien species are introduced unintentionally or deliberately for whatever purpose, some of them become invasive and cause decline and extinction of indigenous species. The Nile perch, introduced in the Lake Victoria in the East Africa, led eventually to extinction of the ecologically unique assemblage of more than 200 species of the cichlid fish in the lake. Nile perch, Lake Victoria, East Africa. Extinction of ecologically unique assemblage of more than 200 species of cichlid fish in the lake. You must be familiar with the environmental damage caused by the trade posed to our native species by the invasive weed species like carrot grass, parthenium, lantana, and water hyacinth. The recent illegal introduction of African catfish Clarias gariepinus for aquaculture purposes is posing a threat to the indigenous catfishes to our rivers. So, the recent illegal introduction of African catfish Clarias gariepinus for aquaculture purposes is posing a threat to indigenous catfishes in our rivers. So, endangered plant species of India are Ralphia serpentine, Santabellum album, Cycas ballodeni. Co-extinctions. When a species becomes extinct, the plant and the animal species associated with it and obligatory way also become extinct. When a host fish species become extinct, its unique assemblage of parasites also meets the same fate. Another example is the case of the co-evolved plant-pollinator mutualism, where extinction of one invariably leads to the extinction of the other. Why should we conserve biodiversity? Here are many reasons, some obvious and others not so obvious, but all equally important. They can be grouped into three categories: narrowly utilitarian, broadly utilitarian, and ethical. The narrowly utilitarian arguments for conserving biodiversity are obvious. Humans derive countless direct economic benefits from nature: food, cereals, pulses, fruits, firewoods, fibers, construction material, industrial products, cannons, lubricants, dyes, resins, perfumes, and the products of the medicinal importance. More than 25% of the drugs sold in the market worldwide are derived from the plants, and 25,000 species of plants contribute to the traditional medicines used by the native peoples around the world. Nobody knows how many more medicinally useful plants there are in the tropical rainforest waiting to be explored. The increased resources put in the bioprospecting explored molecular, genetic, and species level diversity for products of economic importance. The nations endowed with rich biodiversity can expect to reap enormous benefits. The broadly utilitarian argument says that the biodiversity plays a major role in the many ecosystem services that nature provides. The fast dwindling Amazon forest is estimated to produce through photosynthesis 20% of the total oxygen in the Earth's atmosphere. Can we put an economic value in this on this service by nature? You can get some idea by finding out how much your neighborhood hospital spends on a cylinder of oxygen. Pollination, without which plants cannot give us fruits or plants, is another service ecosystem provides through pollinators: layer bees, bumblebees, birds, and bats. Okay, so देखो ये, so to remember this, you just look at here. Narrowly utilitarian gives us some economic benefits. Okay, economic benefits. So economic benefits say we will remember narrowly utilitarian. Here also it is important that what is bioprospecting? It is exploring molecular, genetic, and species level diversity for products of economic importance. Okay, and for broadly utilitarian arguments, it means that in a large perspective, okay, like photosynthesis, pollination. And now it comes ethical argument. The ethical argument for conserving biodiversity relates to what we owe to millions of plants, animals, microbes, species with whom we share this planet. Philosophically or spiritually, we need to realize that every species has an intrinsic value, even if it may not be of current or any economic value to us. We have a moral duty to care for their well-being and pass on their biological legacy in good order to future generations. How do we conserve biodiversity? When we conserve and protect the whole ecosystem, its biodiversity at a level is protected. We save the entire forest to save the tiger. This approach is called the in situ, on-site conservation. However, where there are situations when an animal or plant is endangered or threatened, organism facing a very high risk of extinction in the wild in the near future, the need for urgent measures to save it from the extinction. Ex situ or off-site conservation. In situ, faced with the conflict within the development and conservation, many nations find it unrealistic and economically not feasible to conserve all their biological wealth. Invariably, the number of the species waiting to be saved from the extinction far exceeds the conservation resources available. On a global basis, this problem has been addressed by eminent conservationists. They identified for maximum protection certain biodiversity hotspots, regions with very high levels of species richness and very high degree of endemism, that is, species confined to that region and not found anywhere else. Initially 25 biodiversity hotspots were identified, but subsequently 9 more have been added to the list, bringing the total number of biodiversity hotspots in the world to 34. The hotspots are also regions of accelerated habitat loss. These hotspots, Western Ghats and Sri Lanka, Indo-Burma and Himalayan, cover our country's exceptionally high biodiversity regions. Although all the biodiversity hotspots put together cover less than 2% of the Earth's area, the number of the species they collectively harbor is extremely high, and strict protection of these hotspots could reduce the ongoing mass extinctions by almost 30%. In India, ecologically unique and biodiversity rich regions are legally protected as biosphere reserves, national parks and sanctuaries. India now has 14 biosphere reserves, 20 national parks and 448 wildlife sanctuaries. India has also a history of religious and cultural traditions that emphasize protection of nature. In many cultures, tracts of forest were set aside, and all the trees and wildlife within which were venerated and given total protection. Such sacred groves are found in Khasi and Janita Hills in the Meghalaya Aravalli Hills of Rajasthan, Western Ghats regions of the Karnataka and Maharashtra, and the Sarguja Chandra bustard area of the Madhya Pradesh. In Meghalaya, the sacred groves are the large refuges for a large number of rare and threatened plants. Ex situ. In this approach, threatened animals and plants are taken out from the natural habitat and placed in several special settings where they can be protected and given special care. Zoological parks, botanical gardens, wildlife safari parks. Wildlife safari parks are ex situ, and wildlife sanctuary is in situ. Okay, national parks is in situ, and zoological parks is ex situ. Botanical gardens, wildlife safari parks, zoological parks. There are many animals that have become extinct in the wild but continue to be maintained in the zoological parks. In the recent years, ex situ conservation has advanced beyond keeping the threatened species in enclosures. Now, gametes of threatened species can be present in viable and fertile conditions for long periods, and using cryopreservation techniques, eggs can be fertilized in vitro and plants can be propagated using tissue culture method. Seeds of different genetic strains of commercially important plants can be kept for long periods in the seed banks. Biodiversity knows no political boundaries, and its conservation is therefore collectively responsible for all nations. The historic convention on biological diversity, the Earth Summit held in Rio de Janeiro 1992, called upon all nations to take appropriate measures for conservation of biodiversity and sustainable utilization of its benefit. The Earth Summit held in Rio de Janeiro 1992 called upon all the nations to take appropriate measures for conservation of biodiversity and sustainable utilization of its benefit. In a follow-up, the World Summit of Sustainable Development held in 2002 in Johannesburg, South Africa, 100 countries pledged their commitment to achieve by 2010 a significant reduction in the current rate of biodiversity loss at global, regional, and local levels. Alright, since life originated on Earth 3.8 billion years ago, there has been enormous diversification of life forms on Earth. Diversity refers to the sum total of diversity that exists at all levels. More than 1.5 million have been recorded in the world, but there might still be 6 million species on the Earth waiting to be discovered and named. Of named, more than 70 species are animals, of which 70% are insects. The group fungi has more species than all the vertebrate species combined. India, with about 45,000 species of plants and twice as many of animals, is one of the 12 mega diversity countries of the world. Tropics has more evolutionary time. Species richness is also a function of area of the region. The species area relationship is generally a rectangular hyperbolic function. It is believed that communities with high diversity tend to be less variable, more productive, and more resilient to biological invasions. Earth's fossil history reveals incidents of mass extinctions in the past, but the present rates of the extinctions largely contribute to human activities are 100 to 1000 times higher. Nearly 700 species have become extinct. In the recent times, more than 15,500 species, of which more than 650 are from India, currently face the threat of extinctions. The causes of high extinction rates at present include habitat, particularly forest loss and fragmentation, overexploitation, biological invasions, and co-extinctions. Besides the direct benefits, food, fiber, pharmaceuticals, there are many indirect benefits we receive through ecosystem services, pollinations, pest control, climate moderation, and flood control. 34 biodiversity hotspots in the world have been proposed for intensive conservation efforts. Of these, 3 Western Ghats, Sri Lanka, Himalaya, and Indo-Burma covers India's rich biodiversity regions. Our country's in situ conservation efforts are reflected in its 14 biosphere reserves, 90 national parks, more than 450 wildlife sanctuaries, and many sacred groves. Ex situ conservation methods include protective maintenance of threatened species in zoological parks and botanical gardens, in vitro fertilization, tissue culture propagation, and cryopreservation of the gametes. So we are done with the chapter. Thank you so much.